All right. So I have the fantastic pleasure today of introducing our wonderful panel for the afternoon. A couple of things before we get into that. Did everybody enjoy lunch? Did everybody get a chance to go to the expo, buy some things, get your tarot if necessary? Yes, yes, good. All right, everybody looks refreshed. Awesome. Let's see here, what are my notes? So like all of our panels this afternoon, we do have live captioning. So whether you're here in the building or streaming in live, if you do need captioning or you just love to watch your show with subtitles, because I know it's a thing, you can scan the QR code here in the room. And then on the live, if you are in Zoom, just click the closed caption button and you will have captions for this event. If you have any questions or having any difficulties with that, the folks in the AV booth can get you situated. Let's see here. So just quick introduction to myself again. For those of you who have not met me yet, my name is Michael Bryan II. I am a last year landscape architecture student in here from Georgia originally. So really glad to be, thank you. Really glad to be here. I can continue to sing your praises of all of the hard work that went into this conference. So I will just give that brief applause to that. But we will continue to keep the show rolling. So for today, we have an amazing panel that was put together, Grounds of Inheritance, Land, Law, and Sovereignties. And I'm really excited to introduce this panel because I think for a lot of the folks in the room, this is a really, really good conversation that's going to really invoke some good thoughts in how we start to get into land ownership and really start to take agency back in how we steward our spaces. So the urgency for Grounds of Inheritance, Land, Law, and Sovereignties is as immediate as design continues to shape landscape, the means to access ownership, and sustaining ownership for land for all people. Sustaining ownership for land of all people, especially black individuals, remains incredibly difficult. Since the moment white settlement of the Americas meant indigenous genocide and dispossession, the construction of properties was enshrined both in land and the slave, both Native Americans and en masse indigenous Africans. As planning seeks to grapple with its emergence as an instrument of state power to completely remake majority black communities into destinations for the investment of capital and infrastructure inherited by middle to upper class communities, the afterlives of displacement, gentrification, and rising costs of living compound to a contemporary condition where black land and home ownership are struggling at a scale higher than before integration and under segregation. This construction of property and the constant legal regime of dictating where and how black people can be has left black and indigenous peoples constantly grappling with the ability to transform themselves out of property, to turn it whole and pass it down. As designers, we help shape the character of this land and do so in partnership with property owners. This recognition must encourage us to be far more critical of our role in adding value, transforming the condition of space, and facilitating new occupation of spaces once they have been designed. As such, the legal frameworks, financial models, and institutions and governance structures that oversee the built environment must be scrutinized with this history and remade by its descendants to ensure our participation today is made through democratic and just means of production of space. So I have the pleasure of introducing our fantastic speakers. First, we have Mavis Gregg, who is a death and dirt attorney and conservation professional with nearly 20 years of experience, dedicated to empowering generational family real estate owners, particularly heirs property owners, with the knowledge and tools to sustain ownership and stewardship of their land. As the CEO of Air Shares, Mavis is leading the development of groundbreaking technology to provide the Harvard Graduate School of Design she previously directed. Jumped my line. As the CEO of Air Shares, Mavis is leading the development of groundbreaking technology to provide affordable solutions for intergenerational family-owned real estate ownership. A 2024 Loeb Fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, she previously directed the Gregg Law Firm, PLCC. Carlos Alonso, is a Boston-based realtor with ACB Realty. He specializes in guiding first-time buyers and small-scale investors with complex transactions in the greater Boston market. With a deep understanding of local neighborhoods, market dynamics, and down payment assistance programs, Carlos helps clients navigate the path to home ownership while building lasting stability and opportunity. I might give you a call. I've been trying to find a condo for days, man. I'm like, oh. So Cecilia Cuff is a 2026 Loeb Fellow. Congratulations. Thank you for joining us. From the Harvard Graduate School of Design and a regenerative urban design and community development strategist from Chicago's South Side. As a founder of the Nascent Group, Cecilia leads national interdisciplinary design and development projects at the intersection of design, policy, and investment. Her work advances small businesses, ecosystems, and anti-displacement strategies that preserve heritage while catalyzing local ownership and economic resilience. Cecilia advises the mayor of Chicago on equitable corridor development policy and owns 2 restaurants herself. Her work explores design as a civic tool for healing, opportunity, and belonging. And then last but not least, my boy Leonard Allen Smith, the moderator of this panel and a graduate of the inaugural Masters in Real Estate program at the GSD, and the CEO and founder of Allen Smith Equities, a real estate development and advisory firm. Leonard advises real estate firms on integrating artificial intelligence and automation into their operations, helping them enhance efficiency, decision-making, and deal execution through emerging technologies. In addition to his development work, Leonard is a certified public accountant and earned both his MBA and Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Hampton University. So, Leonard handles that business. All right, I would like to invite our panel to the stage for a fantastic conversation. Take a lot of notes, ask some hard questions because you have a very amazing set of minds up here today. Thank you.
Okay.
But you can still kick off our introductions.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just curious, when they said I'm a death and dirt attorney, did anyone shiver or giggle? Yes. Okay. I mean, that's literally what I do. My work is around the intersection of when people die, owning real estate, and the ownership succession that goes to their families. Many of us who have family real estate have passed real estate through inheritance, and what many of us don't know is that that's where our laws stop as it relates to intergenerational real estate. And for many families, like the ones I work with who are land rich, cash poor, that's their wealth. So I help families who have owned and stewarded real estate for many generations, whether it's housing or a farm or even a forest. Have any of you ever been to a Black-owned forest? They exist, and you probably have. If you have land, if your family has land and trees, you've been to a forest. So my work centers around helping families address the shortfalls of our legal system when it creates this form of ownership, but also look forward to this property as being a continual source of rejuvenation, of respite, of identity, of safety, of resiliency. I love to talk about the law. If you want to ask questions about personal family stuff, we can get into it, but I would love to just talk to you all about what does it mean to be connected to your family's real estate over generations and solutions to optimize that.
Great. Carlos, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
What's up, everyone? My name is Carlos Alonso. So I have a question for the audience, if you don't mind. If you are from Boston, raise your hand. All right, and so I was telling Leonard this earlier, that there's this stigma about there's no black people in Boston, and I feel like I'm in a room full of a lot of black people right now, so can we make some noise real quick? Okay. Thank you. So everyone watching through the live stream, there are black people in Boston. We exist, and we're here. We're not going anywhere, okay? Thank you. I am a local realtor here in the greater Boston area. I've been a realtor for about 3 years now, and I like to help first-time home buyers and really anyone that is not familiar with how to purchase a home or sell their home. And yeah, I just like to be the liaison for people, whether it's knowing the right attorney or the right lender for their journey and how to continue to move forward. And yeah, I come from a family in Dominican Republic that did a lot of developing, and my grandfather was an architect, and he really inspired me to be a realtor because he was of the community and really liked to be there for other people. And the story of him in general is why I'm a realtor in the first place. He was the one that, in 1979, there was a hurricane called Hurricane David that destroyed a lot of the Dominican Republic and killed about 2,000 people and orphaned a girl that lived across the street from my family. And my grandfather took her in and also built a home for her, and she was 20 years old. And I consider her my fourth aunt because my mom has 3 sisters, 5 brothers, and they're all architects, so and developers. So I felt like, well, I don't really feel like I could be an architect, but I could definitely be a realtor. I'm a people person. I love talking to people. I can talk to you till the cows come home, and that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Cecilia.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cecilia Cuff. I am a 2026 Loeb Fellow and happy to be here in the midst of learning and growing and absorbing all the beautiful things that this university has to offer, including this moment right here. I had to take a moment to think about how beautifully curated this space was. So one more shout out to Dana and Kiki and watching you work all week. I would leave school 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, and he was making sure that everything looked beautiful. So shout out to the team that did such an incredible job here. I guess I can separate my career kind of into 3 different paths, which bring me to where we are today. The first part of my career was really spent doing luxury hospitality design. I was able to say, our motto was, I live where you vacation, and that felt great being in that moment, you know. Coming out of college, I thought I wanted to be a teacher. I tried teaching on the south side of Chicago for a year, 8th grade. I don't know how many teachers we have in the audience, but shouldn't have started there. And then lean back on what I knew in the best way that I knew how to take care of my community, and that was always hospitality. I'm Afro-Cuban. My mom moved here. Our family, whenever we go back to visit Cuba, has these beautiful dinner tables. My father was an orphan, so he didn't know what family meant. And so the time that our family would come together where we would be able to feel that love was always a dinner table. And so that made me understand what radical hospitality was. Shout out to Andy for helping me coin that term, my fellow Loeb. But understanding that radical hospitality means taking care of people to no end. And that meant constructing spaces that could house that feeling. So it went from designing a restaurant in Chicago to a bar in Chicago to a hotel in Chicago. And then before I knew it, I was in Curacao or Costa Rica or Miami, designing hotels and luxury resorts for extremely affluent people. And rarely did I see people who looked like me. So I got to my last project, which was in northern New Mexico, in a little tiny town called Taos. We erected a beautiful ski resort, designed 6 mountains and 6 hotels, or 6 restaurants and a hotel on mountain. And then I think I started to move into my second part of my career, which was really understanding, like, how is what I'm doing affecting people? Because I did get to do the little tiny, you know, for anybody who might work in a corporation, you can do as much as you can, but there's always that point when it starts to get uncomfortable where they're like, no, you really can't do much more. And so I realized that for me to get past that, I needed to move into the ownership model. And that's when I opened my first restaurant in northern New Mexico, moved back to Chicago to open up my second restaurant, which was kind of the second part part of my, time, and then getting more into understanding how could we develop in our communities, especially on the south side of Chicago, where we have so much empty land and so much land for the taking in our community, which I know we'll get into a little bit more. But the biggest focus there really started to get into how do we develop corridors in our land. And so started to really get into working with small businesses, developing our communities on the south side block by block, working one-on-one with folks. And so that idea of development land ownership, and my team at the Nascent Group is all minority females, and really we're just mentoring them to be able to build and grow. And so we have about $25 million in grants and lending that we've won for businesses across the south side of Chicago and beyond. We're at about $2 or $3 billion in development projects completed over the past decade. And we continue to grow. One of our biggest allies, Maurice Cox, is in the room, who really helped us to understand what development meant and how you can be a responsible part of the cog in the development wheel. So I'm really excited to be here today. I'm hoping during this time and during my time speaking with everybody here, I'm really focused now on trying to figure out how do we use development as a force for good, and specifically, how do we address anti-displacement through the development that we're doing in our communities.
And last but not least, myself, Leonard Allen Smith. I am the moderator for today. A little bit about me. I actually started in real estate as soon as I left Hampton University, an HBCU down in Virginia, where I went to school. I actually started investing at the age of 24 and doing student housing back in Virginia, and went on to work for KPMG, which is a Big Four accounting firm where I earned my CPA. And it was very fortuitous that at the time I would end up in their real estate tax group just at the same time that I was developing this deep interest in generational wealth and real estate. And for me, the journey really began when I was on my first day of the job looking at a tax return for a multi-billion-dollar real estate investment trust and seeing the tax liability that they had on that tax return, which was, as you might guess, $0. And coming from an HBCU and coming from a family that did not necessarily grow up in real estate, but yet I found this interest, I said, that's a little interesting. What's going on here? What do they know that I necessarily do not know? And why is this topic so contentious in our country? And I certainly want to dive deeper and understand more. And it was through that time there with that firm, understanding some of the strategy and the compliance that went into investing in real estate investment trusts and private equity groups, that I said, you know what? There's an opportunity for me to have a career here. Public accounting, this was fun, but but no thanks. And I'm going to launch my own development firm. Did not necessarily know much about the architecture, the design, the construction. Fortunately, my uncle is an architect in New York City. I said, hey, why don't I come spend 8 weeks with you as I'm pivoting out of public accounting and, just have a little bit of a crash course. That turned into 3.5 years at his office, understanding more about design, project management, so on and so forth of properties around New York. And at the time, also was working with a private equity group where we were raising capital from friends and families, mostly black and brown individuals that we had gone to college with, or they were fraternity members or sorority members that we knew. And we raised a couple $1 million, and we were buying vacation rental homes up and down the East Coast from Martha's Vineyard all the way down to Orlando, Florida. And then several years ago, actually started acquiring and developing properties in New York on my own prior to coming here to the GSD. So there's a wealth of knowledge on this panel. We are very excited. We are going to keep this both entertaining and engaging, and so we're not going to hold all of the Q&A until the end. We have a couple microphones that will be floating around the room. We certainly want to entertain questions and make this a conversation and a dialogue with you all as we go through the conversation. Thank you for the lights, appreciate it. And let's keep it open. I have a series of questions that I want to ask to get the conversation rolling. But to the extent that you have a burning question that you want to ask, feel free to do so, and we will get you a microphone. Does that sound good? All right. And just to kind of take a note of who's in the audience, we're here today to talk about real estate, ownership of it, how to be good stewards of it. Do we have folks in the room who currently own real estate? Okay. Great.
All right, audience, look at that.
The audience,
Let's give yourself a round of applause
round of
for that.
applause for ownership. And are there some folks in the room who are curious but have not yet owned or inherited any property but want to learn more? All right, good. So we've got a very good mix. To start, we're going to talk about property through the form of inheritance. And so I want to pose a question to our entire panel, asking each of you to share what inheritance means in your work from a perspective of family, community, culture, or other perspectives and dynamics.
Okay, I'll start. Well, from my job, inheritance does mean, from a legal perspective, the ownership succession passed through death. That's very dry and technical. But I would say within my why and the work that I do, inheritance is a continuing the stewardship, continuing the enjoyment, and continuing the legacy, continuing, taking care of what your ancestors took care of before they transitioned. You're taking on that role now during your time on Earth. That's what inheritance is to me.
I would agree with the idea of the passing down. I guess I look at inheritance in a little bit different way, only because I think that inheritance signifies that there's some sort of privilege there. Many of the people in our communities don't have an inheritance and don't assume that there will be inheritance, and so we have to have something that feels valuable enough to pass down. And so a lot of times that becomes authorship or ownership, or even meeting people who have dug up their great-grandfather, was it your great-grandfather's records, to make sure that spaces stay protected and names stay protected. So I think inheritance could also mean the ability to pass down and archive information if there is no specific land, because that information eventually will build into the power to be able to have land ownership.
Talk to us a little bit more about that archived information.
I will say I am also guilty of this, is that we move so quickly sometimes that we don't write things down. We don't pass things on. And I think I've, in my own work, tried to self-correct a little bit by creating just data, whether it's a Google Drive that you can share, whether it's resources specifically, that whether it's grants or how to do a process or access to people on this panel, where if there's one person that you can learn from on this panel and of somebody else in your life that could potentially learn as well, I think we're all open books. So it's the idea of the opposite of gatekeeping, and really just trying to archive the information that we have and the processes that you go through to be able to own land, or to make an investment, or to pick your first house, or to protect your assets so that when you do have something, it's acquired in the correct way. So, I take that very seriously. I think mentorship is also part of that. There are rarely a project that you'll see me developing or building that there aren't at least 20 little girls from the south side of Chicago who are following along in my journey and learning, so that they can learn between the ages of 8 and 15, when anything is possible, that this is their space. So I think that idea of inheritance, it doesn't start and it isn't always attached to land. I also know that in many times where we have families with one parent, two parent, all parents working 20 hours a day just to make ends meet, somebody, and that's the point of community, has to step in and be a person to take over that role of giving folks and young people something to inherit.
Carlos, what's your take on inheritance?
Honestly, I feel like it depends on who you ask, because it can be a headache, or it can be the best thing ever. It could be, okay, great, I inherited something from my parents and it could benefit me, or let's say, it really depends on the person and how I feel like planning is important. Like being able to create a trust, or just having open communication with each other and understanding what's going on. And I know everyone's different. Like you can come from a family where it's just an only child, and your parents, let's say they pass away, you inherit the home. It's probably simple, right? But then what about somebody that has like 16, what is it? I think we talked earlier about how somebody approached you and they had like 16 siblings. That's insane. You know, you gotta get a hold of 16 or 15 other people. It comes to be very complicated. So I think you gotta look at it. It depends who you ask. That's how I feel.
And I think to add a little bit of color from the perspective of development, for me, inheritance has been empowerment, and it has been a catalyst. And, you know, I don't come from a real estate family, and we know that real estate has often been a venture that the entire family has gone into, but I have found a launch pad through the fact that my grandparents, my great-grandparents, you know, my parents have inherited things from the generation before. And so here you come as a young man ready to start your journey. And the fact of the matter is the banks don't want to lend to you. You know, you have not done anything yet. Why should we entrust you with this capital? Because quite frankly, you don't have a track record, and track record is very important in real estate, but guess who is willing to take that chance on you? The people that have been pouring into you from day one. And so for me, that was the launch pad to actually get into the game. The fact that my mom was willing to give me a loan to go buy that property down in Virginia. And once you get your foot in the door, now you can start to navigate a little bit more easily, because the conversation shifts from I just have an interest to now I actually have a stake and I actually am an owner. So for me, inheritance has been extremely important in navigating this space. Cecilia, you work where design, policy, and community meet. How can design help people hold on to both identity and opportunity?
As it relates to design and land ownership, I think oftentimes we divorce ourselves from those we are designing from, which can be quite dangerous. I've actually had quite a few conversations in this building since I've been here where concepts have been designed and doesn't seem to take into account that it might take more into account the climate change over the factors that people that are facing today. And so, you know, I guess I will say is being able to integrate community voices in the design that we're doing, being able to think about all of the factors that need to be mitigated through every single piece of design. I guess I'll say in looking at the way that we design with community, thinking about design charrettes and how important they are. And so in some cases, it might seem like that is just a charade, but in those design charrettes, when you take them to folks, when you take a design charrette out of a community center where maybe people don't feel comfortable coming to, or a city council meeting, and you go to those senior centers and ask the seniors, bring them coffee and donuts, asking, you know, what will make you, what kind of space and what kind of designs make you feel this way? Going to children who will grow up in this space. So I think integrating voices is a really important part of design that helps to kind of bring development real to the people. I also think that an important aspect of design is being able to include those voices, because that's who's going to take ownership of it post you leaving the project. So it is not our job as designers to just design a space. Actually, that is just our job. That's our definition of our job, is to just design the space. But if you care about a space, and if you're gonna go back and visit that space, I think that's the difference when you're stepping over a realm of being able to really make an impact, is that then you're involving those voices. Because when you leave, no one's gonna pick up the trash unless you've involved those community voices. No one's going to call you if a pipe bursts and there's water, you know, coming out when it deep freezes. This has happened to me before. But I think the element of empowerment of people through space and design is really important. One, because they feel like they have ownership of something. Two, because if you take them along in the process, that means that they then can do that themselves, and this then becomes a replicable model. But three, it changes the way people feel and how they're connected to their communities, and that's really important of the spaces that we design. We're not designing shells, we're not designing shoes that are gonna go a million pairs out. We're designing spaces for people to be and grow and come together.
Mavis, you have seen families inherit property that becomes both a blessing and unfortunately for many, also a burden. And what are the biggest challenges that these families face, and how can smarter systems change that?
So another question for the folks in the audience. What are the two ways you transfer real estate? Say it out loud. But what effectuates the transfer? A deed, that's one way. So a deed is a legal document. We have all the information we need to know to, see what's happened. What's the other way? Huh? Death. Yes, anyone who dies owning real estate, by operation of law, it automatically transfers. So most of the families that I work with are Black families who acquired property within the 50 years following slavery ending, and the last record is from the early 1900s. So that in and of itself is a nightmare, and it's a nightmare because if you're applying for a home maintenance program or for disaster relief, you have to actually be able to prove that you own the property. And so the way that I do that as a lawyer is I'm a glorified genealogist. I have to build family trees. But I actually enjoy it because that's a way you get to know the family. That's where the storytelling comes in as we build the family tree. But I would say just off the cuff, the work is a nightmare. But I would say for the families. But then, the more challenging cases that I've dealt with have been, for example, this week I was having a conversation with a lawyer from a national law firm that's donating their time for this family matter. Again, it's been the family's had the property for 100 years. They have a beautiful coastal front. They have a forest, all the things, multiple dwellings, but they've been fighting for their land for almost 100 years. I'm the fourth generation of lawyers that have been working with this family. And this is thankfully the least difficult stage, but it's still very difficult because we have to make decisions about should we carve out sections of the property to simplify the conflict between the family members, and then put the rest of it in a model that doesn't optimize their use, but it optimizes their ability to own it. So I would say by nature of the complicated laws, working helping families get to proof of ownership and then get to a succession plan, those are kind of nightmarish. But the other nightmare stuff that I have dealt with is more related to is also related to law, but it's related to gun violence. So I also help estates for which the decedent has been killed by gun violence. And both the cases have been a specific housing community for students that can't get housing at their university. And this is a HBCU in North Carolina. And there's an off-campus housing community that was designed as military barracks. And the actual design of this community makes it difficult to leave when there's violence. And so more than two kids have passed away doing that. And so I mention this because it does intersect with how we navigate our relationship to the built environment. It's very unsafe for many people. It's an act of defiance for many people to own real estate. And so, yeah, it's all a nightmare. But I actually feel really good about it because there's a lot of opportunity too.
So then how might you advise the people sitting here in this room who currently own or are seeking to own some real estate? How can they approach this with their eyes wide open? Because there's so many legal complexities to owning real estate. This is not like owning a stock or a bond or a piece of paper that you can trade instantaneously. There's a lot of legal ramifications and complexities. What would you advise to this room?
Open communication. To the extent that your family has real estate, the old home place, I think communication is the first stop. One, to learn about how the ancestors related to the land. What did they do on the land? What are we doing that's different? A lot of the folks that I worked with, their real estate was largely farms. And so they were growing their own food. They were doing all of these things that were internal. But now most of the people live away from the land. So I think having conversations about the history and how people connected with it is very important. I think also having hard conversations or conversations that feel anti-ownership are also important. Sometimes it does make sense to move on. You know, a lot of families that are land rich, cash poor, live in areas that have frequent flooding. And so sometimes we have to make the difficult decisions, but I think through open communication and thoughtful planning, it can be less painful.
And do you think that the advice changes for people who might be pursuing this as a business as opposed to necessarily family-owned or individually owned property?
No, I think everyone needs a succession plan. If you are dealing with real estate, we think about succession plans with businesses, you know, who's going to be the next manager, et cetera. With real estate, you should do the same thing. You should have a plan for big transitions, whether it's retirement or death, but having a comprehensive plan that looks at all of the aspects, regardless of what tools, you know, if you're using a trust or a business entity, having a very thought out plan that ensures continuity in transition is the best way to approach it. So the transition could be disaster, it could be death, it could be economic, but having a thought out plan that's encompassing of legal tools that help that are, I think, would.
And I want to share with the room something that you and I had discussed during lunch, where I was sharing with Mavis actually one of my favorite courses while I was here at the GSD was a course called Learning from Failure, taught by Professor Donald Sheets, who had a career in distressed investing. And he had asked our class about, well, what creates distress? And many of us had given a financial approach to it. Oh, distress is caused when you don't have enough revenue relative to the expenses that your property is going to incur. And he really wanted to push us out of that simple-minded way of thinking about it, and he posed something that really stuck with me. He said, what happens when the leader of the family, who's the one who's been acquiring all of the real estate throughout their lifetime, and I envisioned myself being that person, he says, what happens when that person dies and they're the one who ultimately signed all of the guarantees for every single loan, and they're the one who knows the portfolio inside and out, and they're the ones that the banks only trust to manage this real estate? What are you guys going to do? And so, you know, I would certainly encourage folks to think about early the succession planning of their business. Mavis, get ready to field some phone calls, I think, from the audience about that, because it is something that we don't talk about. And I would say that as a young man getting in real estate and now matriculating through my career in real estate, that was not apparent to me. It was just such an interest around acquiring the real estate itself, right? And less of thinking about the reality of the management of these assets, both in the short term and ultimately in the near term. And I think we need to do a much better job of thinking about how do we actually manage these assets, not only in this generation, but in the generations to come.
I will say, I think that's a great point. I will say, if you think about the history of, I'm just speaking in the context of the US, but I think it's applicable in many other places. I do believe that as it relates to real estate ownership, it is an act of defiance. And most people who were not white men owning real estate after slavery, you availing yourself to the legal system actually was harmful. And so to an extent, we as a community, as a black community, we have to take into consideration the fact that our ancestors likely didn't do formal planning as a protective measure. What I'm saying now is that we can no longer rely on that. I think there's also spiritual and more, I guess, human connections to land than the law, but we have to negotiate between using the law and what our spiritual and more holistic values are, understanding that that can help us preserve the part that we are treating so special and spiritually. But there's a lot of trauma in our community as it relates to the legal system. It's just now the old method doesn't work to protect us.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Carlos, go ahead, and then we have a question here that we'll take after Carlos.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I feel like there's a lot of moving parts to ownership and real estate in general that can be very emotional, and I feel like a lot of times people are just too afraid to express it. And I feel like it's okay to express your emotions, especially like when you're seeing a house and you're like, I don't like it, when you're first buying, to even discussing the fact that someone might die and you may inherit their home. You have to plan accordingly, because as hard it is to come to those terms that someone you love is gonna pass away, you still have to plan accordingly, because probate is not fun, y'all. When someone passes away and you inherit their home, things could happen, and those expenses add up. But yeah, it's all emotional, but I feel like if we all just hold each other's hand, you could get through it. It's okay. Like you can do it. Like it's a hard pill to swallow, but you can do it.
Please introduce yourself and then your question.
Hello, my name is Eru with Erudite Farms. I was also vending earlier. With the teas, my whole thing is about sustainable farming. But continuing on along the lines of what you've been discussing regarding like the fear and the angst associated with that, and planning, coming up with an estate plan. Personally, I have older parents, immigrants. It was tough for them to finally get a place for themselves. And when I bring up this stuff about estate planning, it evokes those emotions, like what Carlos was describing, just fear. They don't want to touch it, but nobody lives forever. So I wanted some advice from the panel on how to broach the subject and actually move forward in a healthy, productive way.
You're welcome to use me as an example. I actually experienced the worst case scenario. I'm smiling, it's terrible. My parents, no, I mean, literally the reason I'm on this stage comes from tragedy. And I encourage you to share, feel free to share my story. I'm a death and dirt attorney. I told my parents, middle child, I told my parents, please do a plan. Please do a plan. And you know what they said to me? You'll take care of it. Mm-hmm. What I had to take care of was 2 estates because they died at the same time. I am literally the worst case scenario. And all of the real estate that my family had, that's when I took stock of my relationship and my reliance on real estate, because we were now faced with the question of selling our childhood home, selling our granny's home, which was next door, and then 2 other properties that hadn't been lived in for maybe 20 years, but were purchased by Black women in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina during the Depression, while they were working as domestic workers. So my parents didn't hear that part, but I think sharing the worst case scenario, that's what I deal with. I don't want that to be my practice, but that's what I'm most often dealing with, is worst case scenarios for people who did not feel comfortable planning. I promise you, I'm afraid of death at times, but planning does not hasten your death. We have no control over that. So putting down something on paper doesn't actually make you die. But you know what it does, if you don't do it, it makes sure your family wealth dies. I mean, I'm dealing with people who have a fear, again, of the system, of the exposure to the system, or that they might die. But you have to decide. It's a values question. My family's real estate portfolio when my parents died was close to $500,000. My siblings and I got $30,000 each, and there's just 3 of us. So do the math. That's a lot of loss, and it didn't have to be. And I have lots of other worst case scenarios, but I think what people fail to imagine, they can imagine that their death being hastened. They fail to imagine the worst case scenario in which your heirs are faced with very difficult decisions to sell the home place. I just spoke to a woman whose mother is 92. My friend's 60, and her mom won't let her return to the home that she grew up in because her mother doesn't want her involved in the decision making about whether to sell the house. I actually think her daughter should just say, I don't want to talk about it anymore. Just give your mom the hard choice. You can say, do not leave me, I'm gonna denounce my right because I don't want to deal with it. Or you can try to approach it differently. I do think another way is to consider lifetime transfers, but very carefully, because you don't want to create tax implications with lifetime transfers. But that might help ease the thought of their transfer happening because of them dying if they do it during their life. You just have to be thoughtful from a tax perspective. I think the other thing is if it is agricultural land, there's so much opportunity for that to support the community, and I would invite your parents to consider how they can plan for the community. To the extent that their land is supporting clean water or species or anything, they can actually plan for the community, but they can't do it by not doing anything.
Will you tell everybody in layman terms what lifetime transfer is?
Oh, sorry. While they're alive, you all could form some sort of succession plan in which they slowly, gradually transfer interest in the property to you, or you and your siblings, or some family entity, or they even put it into an entity that gradually transfers power and management to the next generation of family members. But lifetime transfer simply means like a deed. Using a deed to transfer as opposed to dying.
Yeah, we had a question in the back.
I'm going to get a little meta on this and sort of on the sovereignty space. So,
And please tell us your name.
my name is Eric Shaw. I'm class of 2000 MUPS. Whoop whoop. There seems to be now a lot of community shaming for black folks selling their land because the black community is gone, right? And so, I just remember working in government, and we're like, how can we convince black folks not to sell their business or their home? And I'm like, that's the least American thing in the history of the world, right? But like, how can we start to have a more expanded, respectful, and scaled conversation? Because we sort of talk about wealth building as an asset, but realize that like, you gotta cash out that equity, you know what I mean? Or you gotta sell that land in some time. So I know like, from y'all selling, or from your respective businesses, how are you finding folks negotiating sort of a need to preserve black places with the desire to actually unlock black opportunity from selling ownership?
Can we discuss that over a drink?
Oh, definitely. Y'all know Eric Shaw, class of 2000, honey.
I guess I can speak to that, and it is a carrot that is often dangled in front of us, specifically in rapidly developing communities. It is very hard to, especially when there are circumstances like property taxes quadrupling, when there are circumstances like having a neighbor that doesn't look like you anymore, when you live in a food desert and you just don't want to be there anymore because there's nothing within 30 minutes of a drive and there's no public transportation. So I guess I'll say, like, I think that in those cases, that power comes from community building because there are resources to offset that. So for instance, being able to go back and negotiate your property tax. Although not widely talked about, that is a possibility. You can go back and ask for a pardon or some sort of concession. I think looking at it as a business model and being creative of using your asset as a business, whether it's Airbnb or renting to someone else or small remodeling. I think what we don't often do is we ask permission to just allow ourselves to be, but instead of doing what we need to do to get done. Our community has always been resilient. We have always figured out a way to make ends meet, and I think we need to look at real estate in the same exact way. What do I need to do with this 400 square foot space to be able to make it make sense for me? What walls do I need to build? What do I need to split? And additionally, what resources are out there? I think what we don't do as a community is share resources, specifically grant resources, because there are grant resources to take care of everything from updating plumbing to tax breaks that come because you've redone your solar panels or some sort of clean energy project. So I think it's resource building, and I don't think that that's something, again, that we have access to. And that is the largest differentiator that I've seen from the black community developing versus the non-black community developing, is affluent developers know how to move and access tax credits, grants, city funding, access zoning changes more easily and faster. And so I think it just taps into the resources of knowing that there are options, because a lot of times we think that this is all we have and there's nothing else available to us, but there is. In every case, there is a way for us to be resilient, and there is a way for us to tap into some sort of funding bucket that we just don't know about. We just have to we need to stop looking around maybe the people that we're always with and look at the people who are actually doing it, which is also why, I know we'll talk about this later, you also shouldn't buy real estate if you don't have any experience doing it. Learn from somebody else first.
I agree with that. I certainly agree with that. I mean, my personal take on it, I think selling real estate is perfectly okay. That might be the developer in me, but at the same time, real estate can be a tool. There's a lot of emotional value that many of us have, particularly when it relates to the family. But at the end of the day, it is a form of shelter, or it provides some entertainment value, or it's a workspace that you're going to use. And there's a useful life to that. And it requires a lot of management at the end of the day to own and operate these things. And yeah, I think it's okay if we make a decision, hey, you know what? Grandma and Grandpa had this piece of land for 40 years, or this brownstone in Brooklyn for 40 years, and they have now moved on, right? They're no longer with us, and none of us know what to do with this or how to operate it, and none of us want to. If we take a decision that we're going to hold this for strictly the emotional value that existed in this place, it will often lead to a loss in financial value for those family members, because you're sitting around, nobody's putting new money into it, nobody is catering to it, nobody's figuring out how to create new value from this thing. Nobody wants to live there, and it falls into disrepair in many instances, and then they get behind on taxes, and then it starts to cascade into a whole lot of issues. But what about selling that when the financial value is at its highest peak, and you can now take that money and reinvest it into your family, into a business, into education? It does not have to simply be we owned it for a period of time and now we need to continue owning it. There may have been value that was created that we can now extract from it, sell it, and reallocate that value into something else that we can better manage and better utilize into the future. So, you know, I don't think we should feel ashamed if we take those stances that, hey, we want to sell that piece of real estate.
I do think this begs for, though, some social action in educating people to help shift the mindset, because my experience, particularly with people who are baby boomers or whatever I am after baby boomers, I think a lot similar to how a lot of Black people are afraid to go into the woods or to the forest, even though they've never been or haven't had a negative experience. There's this intergenerational history and relationship with trees in our community, and so, you know, it's often surprising to me that we don't want to, but then I understand it. Similarly, I think that, again, becoming a real estate owner in America was a big, you know, stance of being humans, showing that we're human, but then it was also a way to grow your own food, to, you know, feed your kids, to send your kids to school, to even help pay for it. We actually need to shift that mindset as a community. Like, what role does real estate play for us now? Particularly the real estate in our homes, but as a community, do we need to continue owning real estate for the same reasons that our ancestors did, or should we have a different relationship with it, especially if we're talking about the financial wealth question or the liquidity question? I actually, you know, your wealth is whatever size it is. It doesn't have to be abundant, but is it diverse? Is it diverse so that you can actually navigate different circumstances depending on what's happening in your life? And so I think that's where our mind shift needs to happen, is as a community, we need to think about our relationship as a whole.
Yeah. Carlos.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to add that it sounds like the question he asked had to do with like downsizing, and I think a lot of times as Black people, we hold on to properties because, you know, it's been in the family for so long, like 20 years, grandma's house, like you have so many memories and you hold on to it, and it's kind of like a form of sovereignty, you know, like power, because you're proud of the property, you're proud of like the memories that you have there, but you also have to come to terms that, you know, there's no longer 5 people that live in this 5-bedroom house. You have to downsize, and it's okay. And there are ways that you can still stay in the community and go from a 5-bedroom to a 2-bedroom. And I feel like we said before, it has to do with just being real with yourself and understanding what you need to do. And sometimes, yeah.
Cecilia, you made a comment that is very interesting around actually maybe you shouldn't own real estate. Can you expand on that a little bit for us?
I will. And this also, you know, I in this room, we have a room of experts, and I think that's something beautiful. I would not go, I'm trying to think of something I wouldn't do. I would not go fly a plane. I know of flying planes, but I wouldn't go fly a plane if I hadn't taken some sort of training. And I think real estate falls along those same lines. There are so many different factors to real estate, and not that you have to. My path has always been work for someone who does the thing that you want to learn through with their dollars, their insights, their historical data, and then you become a working expert in that area. I will say a lot of my design background, because I went to school to be an educator and for business, was not in design, but design came through practice. And so I guess I will say, because there are so many factors that require you to be an expert in real estate that maybe are quite different than many other fields, specifically the legal, specifically the taxes, the attorneys, the land use, the air rights. There are so many different factors that you have to think about now, and you have to be thinking about for 100 years to come. And there are so many people, I would say, in real estate development who tend to be quite savvy, who are real quick to take it away when you aren't paying attention. And so I think it is very much a monopoly game. And so I think just owning a piece of land isn't enough. You have to have a plan for it. You know, you have to have protection for it, and I think that's something that's really important. Is how do you learn? And again, maybe that's how I learn. I learn from doing it, and I learn from repetition. But I also think that there's other ways to learn, like getting a mentor and mentoring, or interning for somebody. And I don't think you're ever too old to be an intern or to be mentored. But I think that those are a few ways that you can kind of get into understanding real estate. And also, you don't have to own real estate. I do think that there's a collective power in owning real estate, and that's something that I, again, specifically am exploring in terms of understanding what does the cooperative model look like. Owning real estate specifically with somebody else is the same as being in a bad marriage. It is very...
Can't be a good marriage? It had to be a bad marriage?
Sorry. I just think you have to think about all of those factors when going into real estate. As you know, are you ready to go into partnership with this person? What are the types of financial models that will support you being successful? Is all of the onus on you? And if so, what does your day, night look like, and how are you going to support yourself? But you have to have a certain level of liquidity to be able to be in real estate, because you have, like, even the sound of dripping water from me owning real estate makes me cringe, because that means that something is happening somewhere in a wall that I can't see.
That L word keeps coming up, and I see we have a couple questions. Let's talk about liquidity for just a moment, and then we'll allow the microphones to start floating around the room. Liquidity, what are we talking about? This is design school, but we have used the liquidity word now at least twice in this conversation. So what are we talking about when we talk about having liquidity?
I'm talking about paying you to make sure my assets are protected. I think that there's a lot of different levels of liquidity. You can't just get a loan. To get a loan, you need liquidity. You can't even get a home loan you probably can, actually, but you need money to even obtain a loan, to obtain the real estate. There's a multitude of bills that come from all the utilities. There's the property tax, which, to be honest, is a huge variable that a lot of times you can't even predict. I'm trying to think of what else. There are insurances that are necessary. I have a home in the high desert, and it's in a special flood zone. So I pay the same amount of money at a home that's at 8,000 feet elevation as somebody who would, that's in New Orleans. So I think there's liquidity. And then again, there's the funds for the what ifs. It's, if somebody tries to buy the space next to you, or, I think that there's so many things that could happen. And you have to be prepared. When you own real estate, it becomes like a child.
When I think about liquidity, it's certainly as simple as, can I make it to the finish line? Do I have enough funds available when I'm undertaking the development project? When shit hits the fan, because it's absolutely going to, do I have enough money to get me where I need to go? In the event the seller doesn't show up, you get sued, or a myriad of other things. And oftentimes we have the money for the initial acquisition or some of the early stages of the project, but do you have enough money or access to? Because it's not all about, do do you by yourself have all of the funds necessary, but can you actually access the money that you need to maintain and manage these properties? You had something you wanted to say, and then let's go to the crowd.
I was going to give some free legal advice. Many of you who are from the South or have family from the South, or maybe anywhere in the U.S., many of you are familiar with funeral insurance. Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. I will tell you this, most of the families that I've worked with who are land rich, cash poor, when that property transfers, they will spend the money from the life insurance policy on the funeral instead of the mortgage and the property taxes. So that's the liquidity that I think about, how we prioritize what cash is available during the transition. And if you have a life insurance policy, you're welcome to use that for your funeral, but I would encourage you to leave that for liquidity for that transition.
All right. Does anyone have the microphone in hand?
I'm behind you. I'm behind you.
Oh.
I'm behind you.
We'll take in the back first, and then gentleman with the jacket, you can go second.
Okay, my name is Carmen Mays. I am a public administrator. I work for the city of Birmingham and in Alabama. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the idea of land management from Black family perspective and the idea of actual community building, not like in the sense of like, oh, this is my community, but like literally houses inside the city limits. And how do we repopulate neighborhoods? And how do we, reestablish the thing that we're all so nostalgic for when we talk about, when I was young and I used to do this, and now kids don't have X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, because you won't come be our neighbor, and we talk about like the shame of selling grandma's house or selling, we all saw soul food, those of us who are old enough for soul food. But the idea of what do you do in a city that is built for 600,000 people, that has 200,000 people, that's tens of thousands of vacant lot with no demand because Black professionals don't see it as valuable to live in these spaces, to live in the places that they grew up in, the places that they claim all the time to tell you, oh, I'm from such and such, and I'm from such and such, but you won't come live there. And, the detriment that causes further to the city, like we don't have enough residents, we don't get to do infrastructure improvements, our schools are underfunded because we don't have enough going into property taxes. These companies come in and buy cheap houses, they don't fix them up. How it affects the investment of myself and my family because we chose to stay and keep up our property, but so-and-so who we grew up with down the street, like you sold your mama house to God knows who, and now we're trying to contend with that friction in our neighborhood. And so it's not so much as a question, but just like, this is something that we're dealing with, that we're also actively trying to get people to do wills. Alabama is a state that you do probate no matter what. Alabama's a greedy girl, okay? She's gonna get her cut, will or not. And so that means, like, yes, we want you to have a directed will because we want you to have instructions going into probate. But as you said, when it comes to liquidity, probate is not free. And if you just spent all the money at the funeral home, then what does that mean about how your relatives are able to access your property? And that's if they come due probate. We have even tens of thousands of more properties where they're still in the dead person's name. So I'm just saying, for those of us who are urbanists and planners, city planners, community planners who are thinking about repopulating urban areas, this part is also integral to that conversation because we're not having, at least not yet for us. Allegedly, the Atlanta bubble has burst, which means folks gonna start coming east, and Birmingham should be next on the list, and Chattanooga. But we're not seeing where people actually want to be in our neighborhoods, and this land is just there, and it's a big old mess. But we can, if you want to talk about it later, we can. But
let's have one person respond to that, in the sake of time, and then we'll take some more questions from the audience.
I just want to throw out there to you, Cecilia, you talked about block by block. I am curious about community succession planning in which real estate owners, I'm just going to use homes as an example, but you know, to the extent that you have a block of people who have been living and owning in the same place, could they engage in community succession planning in which they're talking about what their shared future looks like for not just themselves, but for their loved ones or from whomever. And the closest example I have is where is a land, what's it called, community land trust model, where they've agreed to transfer their property into a community land trust and then just co-manage, you know, that part. But you know the block by block method. I'm curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, and I do think this is something we might have to talk about afterwards, and I'm happy to, I think we're all happy to sit and talk through it, but I also want to, you cannot do it. So you can't hold that. It's too much. I know, because I do the same thing. You can't hold that on yourself. You have to do it as a community, and that community has to be layered. You have to be able to combine policy with your local government, philanthropic dollars to be able to help with the planning and the sort of the community process. But I think creating community benefits agreement have been really, really proven is what are the set of benefits that you are looking for as a community, what are the goals of the community, and then you have to be able to articulate that, go to a nonprofit, go to the city, and to be able to have those meetings to come up with who are the key players that are going to make it happen. The community just by themselves are never going to be able to make it happen. It just isn't possible financially, but the city has a plan, and a lot of times, to be honest, the city maybe doesn't have a plan because they're doing a million other things. But if you hand the city a plan and it makes sense legally, it makes sense financially, it makes sense from a succession planning of we want to attract movie filming, we want to attract quantum, a myriad of things. So we want to reactivate these 7 schools that are empty. You can do it block by block. You can cut it off in bite-sized pieces, and in those bite-sized pieces and those plans, working with city officials, working with philanthropic organizations, again, who have grant dollars to be able to fund specific parts of those projects. I would say that that's how you can continue to spark the reinvestment. And then once you get some of those amenities that will make people want to live in the community, you can't live in a community that doesn't have a drugstore, that doesn't have a grocery store, that doesn't have a restaurant, that doesn't have, there's a lot of ice cream shops here, but a lot of ice cream shops in Boston. I've never seen so many ice cream shops in my life. Maybe a coffee shop. But in general, if you build the plan and you build it in phases, even if it's 10 phases and that creates a succession plan, then you can work with, again, city, philanthropic. I think that those are two. I think even looking at county and federal grant options also. I think those are ways that you can start to kickstart it. But once you create the momentum, it will come. And once you attract that momentum and get the PR, hire a PR firm, and you start to get that momentum, then other outside investors who are going to want to bring the liquidity into it are going to start to look at the space. And that's when things start to move so quickly that you really have to be able to, at that point, be holding space.
Gentleman with the white jacket, and then we've got one afterwards in the corner.
Thanks for taking my question. Alan Penniman, urban planner with Agency Landscape and Planning. We're right across the yard on Mass Ave. Yeah, me and my 2 sisters have recently become the caretakers and power of attorney for our aging mother. And this is a follow-up to the question about lifetime transfer, because we learned mainly because we feared her Medicaid debt would come for her house if she passed. So we decided to do the transfer before, and my question is, how can the average unsophisticated family set up a trust so that we can, when we do sell the property, we can avoid capital gains, just like the big sharks that Leonard referenced in his intro?
Leonard's the CPA, but I don't know that you can avoid capital gains just by operating through a trust. I think if you do a lifetime transfer, that will be the basis. When that transfer happens, that will be the basis. But that's a Leonard question. I will say, as it relates to avoiding reclaiming from Medicare, you do have to plan in advance. Each state has their own rules. In North Carolina, I think it's 5 or 7 years, I don't remember, but each state has their own rules, and you want to make sure that it's before that period kicks in. And then also, I do like the idea of putting it in a trust instead of putting it in your siblings in your name individually, because that can help shield your personal liabilities, or shield the property from your personal liabilities. Yeah, But it's a hard, you could also consider purchasing it from your mom to address that planning issue. But it is complicated, and I'm glad that you have started. Is she going into care, or she's already in care?
Yeah, she's in care now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, then you might start planning for what that looks like to offset or to counter their claim. It's not exciting advice, I'm sorry.
I'll follow up with you later. Thank you.
Okay.
Leonard no longer gives tax advice as a CPA, so I'm not going to do that. What I would advise, though, is there are a lot of professionals that have their own specializations, and it is important to find the people who do specialize in these areas. So it's not enough to say, hey, I'm just going to talk to a CPA. You want to find a CPA who really understands real estate and understands taxation. You don't want to just find an attorney. You want to find an attorney that understands lifetime transfers. So as a real estate developer, I am someone who has a myriad of professionals for each of these categories. I don't just have one attorney. I have a ton of attorneys. I don't have one accountant. I use various accountants. And so for the unsophisticated person, you have to understand I can't just go ask my uncle who gives me advice about everything because he thinks he knows everything, right? To advise on these things, I have to go find that professional who can really give me some good guidance. But we had a question in the back. Is the microphone still over there?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Peace and blessings, family. I'm Monica Lewis-Patrick. I serve as the president and CEO of We the People of Detroit. What I would say to this room, just as a comment, is that as you are moving in development and you're doing things that are innovative, is that making sure that the consciousness is there. Because what we're finding in places like Detroit, they are bringing in people that look just like you to actually gentrify our community and take our property. And so it is very, very important that, especially those of the African diaspora, is that you are using your talents, your expertise, your brilliance, and your genius in a way that is safeguarding property for future generations. And then my question is more specific. As a nonprofit, we have purchased lakefront property in a historically Black resort community. We are now trying to figure out instruments that we can put in place, not just for us, but because we are asking other community members to do the same thing to safeguard the loss of those properties. Are there instruments that we can use to make sure that it stays in the public trust? So we're not wanting to just keep it for our organization. We're wanting to make sure for generations to come that Black and brown children can come and participate and be a part of this experience of not being over inundated in an urban surrounding, but having a more rural experience.
Thank you for sharing.
Wait, so are you asking whether the ownership succession, or you're saying or the properties around neighboring the property that you all own?
No, we're convincing other organizations to also buy property so that we can keep the land, the collective land, in our purview. But my asking is there an instrument other than a land trust instrument that we should be considering to safeguard those properties?
Well, I do think if you don't do this already, I do think getting first rights of refusal on the properties that you do want to make sure stay in this envelope would be a great investment. I'm on our state parks board, and that's what we do. They've already identified properties that are within state parks or around state parks that they want to make sure stay the way they are, and so they've bought first rights of refusal. But then from a ownership perspective, I do think if it's going to be different organizations that are owning, there should be some sort of mutual agreement around succession. You know, should any of them decide to sell, or if they just sunset the organization, there should be some sort of agreement between those different owners to ensure that it doesn't compromise the overall objective. But I do think land trust, community land trust, could work too if there was to be a group. But I can't think of another ownership model that could be supportive. Yeah, I just think it's more of layering agreements, kind of like what you were saying, layering community development.
All right, let's take one more question, and then we'll do our closing remarks. Does someone have a microphone? With the green vest, please.
Yes, I have a microphone. So I'm Coleman Jordan. I'm a professor out of Morgan State University. Now I'm living in Baltimore. Today I'm living in Baltimore, but actually I have property in Ann Arbor, and in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And every now and then, about every month or every couple of months, apparently people now know that I rent it out, and I get a call. We want to give you cash for your property, and I want to know if that's how susceptible, as far as Black communities are, for those calls, and is that an advantage or a disadvantage for once you get that call? Because I hang up. I said, no, I don't have the property's not for sale, so I hang up. But I assume that it might be a tool that is used to appropriate property, basically. So I'd like to know what your thoughts are. Do you say yes or no, or hang up?
I get those calls a lot.
They call my house every day. They call my mama's house. They call everybody trying to get my stuff all the time.
Yeah. I get them a lot. It's predatory.
Yeah.
It's the same as everywhere on the south side of Chicago is the signs, we buy your insulin in cash. We buy your house in cash. We buy your car. Yeah. It's predatory. And all we can do is educate each other to not answer those calls.
I mean, if you think about, and this is what I do when I look at real estate records, like if you look at the public records, you can ascertain who are remote owners, and those are typically the people in my experience, who are targeted. Like if you're not actually living at the property, or if you are living at the property, they often target people who are older. They look for certain characteristics, is my point. And so I think proceeding through a realtor, if you were wanting to sell it, which it sounds like you're not, makes them more sense than these solicitations.
Also, Ann Arbor, Michigan, don't sell that property.
No.
Ever.
Mm-mm.
I just want to add to put your name on a do not call list so they can leave you alone.
Okay, so we've got just a couple minutes left before we need to wrap. Very curious if there's a practical takeaway, piece of advice, resource that you might want to leave with the audience after today's conversation.
Well, I know earlier you had brought up how there's grants and other ways you don't have to save all your money into your 40 or whatever to buy properties. Right now, Boston recently as of August, created a co-buying program where, let's say, I wanted to buy a multifamily, but I don't have all the money. I want to move in with Mavis, and I'll live on the first floor. She'll live on the second floor of a multifamily or a three-family, and Leonard lives on the third floor. We can buy that multifamily together. I believe it's with 0% down, and you would probably pay that back until one of us decides to move out. And I think you can also decide on how you want to purchase the property, whether it's an LLC or a co-op or however you want. But the resource is there. I know that if you make 100% of the median income, I know I'm using a lot of words that you guys probably have no idea about, but just off the top of my memory, I know you can get up to $50,000. So the resources are out there. There's also, and this is nationwide for if you're a teacher, if you are a public service, like a doctor or a police officer, there is a way where you can get grants up to between $8,000 to $15,000 through the Next Door program. So I just want to throw that out there, that there are possibilities and options for everyone. If you want to purchase a home, there's a lot more that I can share, but time is not on our side right now. But yeah, I just wanted to share that realtors are not all the time your enemy. Some of them could be a little slimy. Not me, though. I'm here to educate my people, and I just want to point that out, that there are people out there that care for their community. And like I said earlier, Most realtors are a liaison, and they're able to connect you not only to a home, but to the right resources around you that can help you understand real estate. Thank you.
All right, nobody's getting off the hook on this question. Everybody's got to respond. So, Cecilia, you want to go next?
I know I had one that I prepared, but I 100% forgot from being up here. You know, I guess I'll just, my parting thoughts is just that I do see land ownership as a collective power. I have seen the way wealthier groups move around, and I've seen how they think 50 years ahead of what they want to have and own based on the variables that are around them. So please don't move throughout the world with blinders. If you're gonna buy something, don't buy something just quick that you can afford. Maybe wait a year to buy something in a space where you know there's a hospital coming in because there will be more value or it'll be more. So look at all the factors, the extenuating factors before you buy. And then just make sure that it's okay to be mentored. I'm mentored to this day, but just at a certain time, I do think, which is why I thought Ann Arbor, Michigan is incredible, that there are certain factors like climate, like water, like just fire. We have to look at all these factors and understand how they are making us move today, but more importantly, for what we own today and what we're going to own in 50 years or 60 years, or if we do want to have something to leave in our legacy to our next generation, make sure that you're taking those factors into account, because those others who are developing on a larger scale and faster are. That wasn't a very positive ending note. But.
I know, I'm sitting here thinking, what can I say that's
It's not all sunshine and rainbows in real estate, so.
I guess my practical tip would be to think broadly and innovatively, is that a word? With innovation, what succession could look like for you. Meaning, I have a condo, I'm single, I don't have kids, and I actually want my home to go to my girlfriends. I want it to be a place of respite for my sister girls, so to speak. I think similarly, we can think the same things about our farms, our forests, the old home place. I mentioned that we do still have 2 properties back home. I don't live back home anymore, but I have cousins, and I could be the conduit for helping them become owners for the first time. So thinking differently about what succession looks like and what family looks like. For many of us, family is built. And so you have a lot of options when you think that expansively.
Yeah, and I think to bring us home, one thing I would say, depreciation and taxes are very, very real and can positively impact or negatively, if you don't plan accordingly, your portfolio. So make sure you have a good CPA in your world to help you think about that stuff. Because it can really make or break some of your investment decisions. I think having an understanding of risk is really important. And when we start to look at real estate in the long term, some of those risks might actually get mitigated as just a result of the time that might pass. Whereas if you're taking decisions that are much shorter, you have a lot of factors that you have to deal with in the here and now. And there are a couple books which might be really different for this room to read, but some that I have found to be really impactful in my journey. There's a gentleman by the name of Howard Marks who runs a very large institutional management firm. They've got several $100 billion. And he talks about risk and what that means. And I can tell you that I have always been so forward about wanting to acquire real estate. And I've had to come to a realization that not all time is a good time to buy real estate. And there are moments in my career where maybe, Leonard, you actually just need to sit down, be still, and wait for the opportunities to come. And I would share with everyone that just because we want to do it or we feel the need to do it does not necessarily mean that it's going to work out for you in a financial sense, in an emotional sense, in a health sense. And there are times where you might just need to say, you know what, I'm interested in real estate, but maybe there are other things that I should be pursuing. There are other assets, stocks, bonds, all types of commodities that you might want to get interested in. you might choose to invest in yourself, right, through the form of education as opposed to buying a piece of real estate. And so just take time, be patient, get with other professionals. The two books that Howard Marks has, of course, their names are now slipping my mind, but that's okay. I've given you his name, and you can look those two up. One is, I think, Mastering Market Cycles, and I forget what the other one is, but really brings a different perspective around how you think about investment decisions. And just know that buying a piece of real estate and investing in real estate are also very different things, and you need to understand where you sit in the table. So with that, I want to thank all of you for coming from around the country and around the world and being here, bringing your intellect, your curiosity, your energy, and yourselves to this room, into this conference. Thank you to the folks that have organized this. There's still some events left for the remainder of today. This is not the last one. There is a coffee break that's coming up, and there is a keynote later on this evening with Princess Faniyi. I hope I pronounced that correctly, and if I messed that up, I certainly do apologize, but hopefully you can all stick around for that, and we look forward to the rest of the collaboration and engagement for the rest of today, and safe travels back to wherever you came from. So thank you for your participation today. Okay.